just want to welcome everybody here. We're going to get started. It's 2 o'clock, so people can continue to trickle in if they need to. But just to make sure we give ourselves enough time, we're kind of doing this in 2 parts. I'll introduce myself first. I'm Dan Ricke. I'm with BlueCross, BlueShield of Tennessee. We're going to kind of go over the use case we had, the implementation that we did, and kind of like how long it roughly how long it took for us to achieve that. But then we're going to go ahead and hand it over and get a demo too, to actually have someone from Ping demo exactly the configurations that we did on our systems to achieve the pieces we had to do. So let's start with our business cases. That's what usually happens for all of us when we're going through a data migration or trying to figure out if there's something wrong or something broke with what we have. One of the first things we had is we wanted to consolidate and simplify our directories. So within our environment, we'll have some more slides on this, but within our environment we had a couple different directories that were servicing our customer side of the house. We really wanted to simplify that, collapse that, both from a support structure or support piece of it, and then also from just the overall integration with our developers and our app teams. The next use case we had is, as an insurance company, we're kind of locked into with our states. So we really can't sell outside of our states unless we have presences in those states. So lately our business has been trying to find other business options that lets us kind of broaden our horizons and maybe get out and become more as a service to sell some offerings, some things we do very well to other companies. So with that, we had a requirement to basically start doing some tenant-based separation, logical separation within the directories. The other piece we had is enabling additional integration methods into a directory. So if you worked with directories before, a lot of your basic directories will have LDAP connections that are available. If you're wanting to do any kind of APIs or anything like that, you're usually writing your own wrappers or something like that for integration for your app teams to connect to it, use it, read it, write to it, and all that kind of stuff. So we were looking for a way to maybe even have something built in if possible, to have it as part of the stack, so we didn't have to kind of manage this extra piece to enable our developers. The other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to centralize our customer data. So not only do we have multiple directories that were that people had to use and consume and things like that, we also have other data stores that had various pieces of identity data that we wanted to try to collapse. So a lot of our apps, what was happening is they would be an authentication event would happen. We'd pass data into the app. The app then would start making queries to all these different backend systems for basic identity profile type information. We wanted to cut back on that just for an overall performance, login, all that kind of stuff. And of course, we always want to enhance our security posture. I'm part of the security team that owns this, so that's always our most biggest or highest priority. Sometimes our business, that's last on their list, but to us, that was an important thing. So when I say that, in our eyes, what we were doing is making sure that we could have secured connections into it. We knew who was connecting to it, making sure they're authorized to connect to it, and going with our least privilege model that we really try to stick hard to, like I believe probably most of you do as well. So if I have an app hitting us, they're only seeing the users and the attributes they should see to achieve what they're trying to do. So then with that, we had functional requirements as well that we were trying to dig into to make sure that we can meet basically the migration. So one of the things we were looking for was a password synchronization. So our business came to us and said, great, we love that you're trying to put a new platform or framework in place to allow you to meet our needs a little more easier, so have that flexibility. But we don't want to disrupt our customers. You cannot make them change their passwords. You can't let them know that this is happening behind the scenes. It's got to be seamless. So that became one of our key things that we needed to make sure that whatever we did for migration, we had to achieve that piece of it. The other thing that we had is we had some interesting applications. And I don't know if it's older or newer. It's just the way these apps are written, but they're major components, major platforms that run within our organization. And with us being an insurance company, we have basically 4 main types that we deal with. We have members, we have providers, we have a broker or agents that sell our insurance, and then we also have what we call an employer. Those are like the self-funded. They kind of manage their own users and things like that. With that, what we had to do is, when I say we had to have separate structures, we had to have a way for these apps to hit that and really only see members, only see brokers, only see that. But we didn't want to have a really heavy hierarchy in our tree. We wanted to keep our tree very, very flat. Just for speed purposes and all that for lookups. So this was an interesting one that we kind of had to really think about how we were going to achieve. The other thing we had is a parallel migration. So we did not want to get into this heavy kind of a forklift that say all of our apps that are using these directories today or need that information, they all have to cut the same weekend. That was something we were trying to avoid, and really it was to cut back on the impact to our development teams and our application teams, so that way they didn't all have to work their butts off to try to line up on the same day, and if, let's say, one dev team was running into some problems, we had to delay everybody else. So with that, we wanted to make sure that our legacy directory and our new directory had some level of synchronization real-time happening between them. Not batches, nothing like that. It had to be real-time based with registration and everything else happening. And also, you know, if you've had directories in your environment long enough, you've done some scheme extensions, you've probably done some funny things to that directory at some point in time to make, you know, some application work or to support something that you're trying to do within your environment. We had that. So we had to have a directory that we could move and populate data in that would have the flexibility needed to still support some of those older applications without having real big code overwrites or rewrites happening. And just to touch on some of the products that we have to deal with, so within our environment, we're a very big IBM organization, so we use web server virtual portals. We've went through recently a big migration to DX9. And then also we are ping-fed, ping-access customers as well, so we wanted a tool, of course, that was going to play nice with that, and then not have to be a bunch of extra work in those products to make it work as well. And then we, in our organization, to kind of prevent or keep our developers from having direct access to a lot of things, we have a lot of wrappers that are in place. So we have one that's called our user management services kind of layer. We had to have a tool that could sit behind that and basically try to limit and help or lessen the amount of work our developers are going to have to do. We wanted them to still use the services that are already in place, but basically the back end would be the only thing getting changed. So to them, they really won't notice a difference. It'd be more at the service layer back that we'd make in the change. With that, I want to just kind of show you, this is kind of a high level of what our current legacy state looked like before our migration. So, you know, probably not that uncommon from most other organizations to where we had a load balancer. We were using Radiant Logic. We were using it as a virtual directory to help with some of the views in the back end. So you'll see we have a kind of external user Active Directory and an internal Active Directory. And what Radiant was helping us do is really just kind of show a single LDAP to our application, so they really didn't know what's going on behind the scenes. So we already started that probably a couple years ago to start simplifying the connections, so our apps weren't, you know, say hitting internal for internal employee authentication, then hitting external if it's a dual used or dual purposed application. Now this is where we are today. So this is kind of our current state, and when I say future, it's current as of today, but it's also going to be that way just for a little bit, kind of as we get through the rest of our migration. So this slide, basically what I'm trying to show is what we've done right now is we have the new ping directory, which you'll see is the customer directory. We have our other customer, you know, this other company I was talking about. We have another one that's basically it's a logical separation running on the same hardware. And then we have our internal Active Directory. And you'll notice I have some dotted lines there. And basically what we're doing is we have that single external Active Directory, but we're using a product called DataSync that actually came with our ping purchase that we made. So we bought Ping Directory and Ping DataSync, and really the reason we did that is to have that capability to keep that data fresh, keep it live, and it's all real-time, near real-time syncing that's happening. Like I said, we didn't want to get into a batch thing due to the members kind of enrolling at all times of the day, and they need to get into systems immediately. There's not we can't have a 5, 10, 15-minute or even hour timeline between them getting in all the systems. And then with that, we also we wanted to break it apart. So within that old Active Directory, we originally had some of that stuff kind of merged together, kind of meshed together. DataSync actually let us split those customers apart. And then on top of that, what we use is something called Ping Proxy. And what that does, that lets us kind of tie a nice bow around all this. So as you see, I basically have 3 directories now. So you know, when I talk about consolidation, you're like, well, Dan, you kind of went backwards. You went from having a Radiant and internal to going to 3. That's true from a back end part of it, but really when it comes to the front end, so what our developers are going to be hitting, what the rest of our environment uses, that's not the case. They're going to see a single directory. Within Ping Proxy, we are going to actually determine where they're trying to go. So with Ping Proxy, there's some pretty cool features of that. So the way we're doing it is based on bind ID. So the bind ID that comes into that system, we can decide what that bind ID has access to, and we know what that bind ID is looking for. So we can say, hey, your external app trying to log in a member, based on your bind ID, you only get to see member subset data, and that's in our customer directory. So I can route that through the Ping Proxy to do that. The other cool thing the Ping Proxy lets me do is it has some pretty neat load balancing capabilities in it from an LDAP perspective. So it's very good at kind of being aware of the back-end servers. So it knows if something's taking longer to respond, it knows, and it can start rerouting traffic so that way I have time to fix something if it's going bad and my end users doesn't know what's happening. So if I have one node acting up in the back end, Ping Proxy will help me by notifying me there's a problem, but it'll start routing the traffic to the ones that are responding a little quicker. So from our perspective, that's really nice from a usability side of it. Gives us chances to fix a problem if there is one prior to any kind of end user or anything like that seeing it. The other way you can do it, which we didn't do in this case, but Ping Proxy is also smart enough to know based on the search context and things like that that you can send in, you can build policy on that as well. So if you send a certain search context, then it can actually determine where that needs to be routed to in the back end as well. So the Ping Proxy gives you quite a bit of flexibility, and that was one of the main things we were trying to achieve. Like I said, to really show, hey, here's my members, here's my brokers, here's my employers, and stuff like that, and also control who's coming in, who can see what. So now we actually have an end state we're shooting for as well. So it's great. We got to that point. We got our platform in place, but we're not done. There's a lot more things that we want to do. With that, this is kind of from the previous slide. Now we want to add to that. So once we're able to turn off our old directory, get rid of that, retire that, we want to take and continue to use a data sync. So I talked about those original extra databases that we have that have additional data in them. I want to start bidirectionally pulling that data into my directories and also keeping things up to date. So as of today, we have a problem to where when a user kind of initially registers, that very first time it's put in all those places, but we don't do a good job of keeping that data up to date all the time. So as a member changes, or as maybe they change their plans, or as they add additional members into their policy, not all of our systems are updated like they should be. So we're already working on this, is having data sync do that, keep that data up to date for us so that data doesn't get stale. And we also hopefully eventually can eliminate some of these extra data sources. So we want it to eventually just live in directory and not actually be in these other places anymore. We believe that's a way to simplify our environment, cut back on some of these extra kind of Microsoft SQL databases that have been thrown up, because this one app at one time had some reason to understand that you needed to check some box to agree to some terms that was unique to them. We really want to get away from that. We plan on the directory being the thing that we're going to store that kind of data in. That way more people can use it and take advantage of it. Next I want to kind of talk on is kind of like how long this took us to do. So we actually were able to do this in a pretty fast time. So we really started having the kind of conversations with Ping, kind of doing some initial planning and stuff like that around September of last year. We then started working through within a dev environment, doing some initial configurations, doing some of the proof of concept stuff, doing some unit testing within our own team and with some of the other app teams. And really, if you look at it, it took us probably about 4 months or 5 months to really get the infrastructure in place, get the initial configurations in place. And then you'll notice that some of this does stretch a little further. And the reason why that happened is we had some larger initiatives that we had to connect to in order to actually get everyone to be on the same page with us. So it's great you have a new directory and all that kind of stuff, but we actually had some larger portal overhauls happening and other apps that were going through some major migrations, and we had to line up with them. So we basically said, here's this whole new stack, we're going to go at the same time. And that's why you'll see some of this will drag out just a little bit. But we ended up moving about 2.2 million user objects into the new directory. And that synchronization itself, the initial load only took a few minutes to do. And now data sync, because it's really watching just deltas, so it's real-time syncing. It's constantly running. So our users now are staying, that's all 2.2 million. Anytime there's password changes or any of that kind of stuff, it's keeping it in sync. The one thing I guess I just realized I missed, and I apologize, I missed it on one of my previous slides, but the way we achieve the password piece, that was one of our main requirements. The way we achieve the password piece is Ping has 2 ways of handling that. One is the one we didn't use, which is there's an agent you can install on, say, a legacy directory like Active Directory, and it'll actually watch when password changes happen, it intercepts that password, and it'll send it to the Ping directory. We didn't do it that way because that still requires a password change happening in order for that to work correctly. So what we leverage is something called pass-through. So Ping has this really cool built-in piece of the directory that says, when a user authenticates, check with me first. So we'll send a user authentication against Ping directory first. It'll go look and see if that password's there. If the password's null, it'll actually say, okay, I'm going to send it off to this other directory that you have set up as an authentication source. So it sends it over to Active Directory. Active Directory then does the authentication, and as that comes back across, Ping directory grabs that password, sets it as the password now in the directory. So the next time that user logs in, it'll hit Ping directory, and it'll say, hey, look at that. I got a username and password for you. Is that right? Yep, it lets you in. The other thing that we've configured is because we're not syncing passwords, we sync all the other objects besides passwords. We also have a check to say, hey, if a password change happened to happen, and for some reason it happened the old one, not the new one, what it'll do is even on a password failure against PingDirectory, it'll say, hey, let me go check with this other guy real quick just to make sure that that isn't the right password. So it'll go check with the other system, and if it comes back that that other one says, yep, that's right, PingDirectory will actually overwrite the password it has to rematch itself again. And that to us was the easier direction to go because, like I said, it cut back on having to send this mass email out to all of our members saying, hey, we got this new security system, but we need you all to log in and change your password, and you got 6 months to do it or we're going to disable you. And our business was really, really, really against us doing that. So that's where the Ping kind of gave us that flexibility to allow us to do that. And that's all I have for kind of my part of it. So as you come up here, get ready to do the next part of it, I guess I could take some questions if anyone has any questions about this part of it, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, so luckily we're not spread out geographically like that because we are a single state plan. Our data centers and everything in the single state of Tennessee. But what we've done is it's basically we have it in layers. So we have load balancers that sit in front of our proxies, but then our proxies are the ones that are directly talking to our backend directories, which are load balanced as well. And like I said, I unfortunately wouldn't know all the different options for that because we don't do that, but I think that's something Ping could probably help explain of when you have, you maybe have data centers across the country and stuff like that, how do you do that? We don't have that problem or don't have that situation. Yes? So the Active Directories themselves aren't talking to each other. So we had an Active Directory that's for internal only. We have an Active Directory for external only. And then we put PingDirectory in place. But we are allowing PingDirectory to write back an Active Directory. But what we've done with that is we have it set to certain attributes that we're letting sync. So PingDirectory is going to send certain ones back because if it gets changed there, we know it's a new application using it because we did have to do some changes to the way we did some of the attributes. So that's kind of where we're keeping away from having collisions and stuff like that happen. And we know still the legacy systems are still writing the old one, so we know to let that stuff through. That was your question. So what we've done, we actually were able to do pretty much a one-for-one on that. We don't have, so like I said, we're able to do a one-for-one. So I know if someone changes something in this Active Directory, I know that it should be allowed to happen here, write that back. And I know this one should be happening here, write that back. So there are certain applications that have been moved. Like I said, we have a couple we're still trying to wrap up on. So for the most part, PingDirectory is the one doing a lot of the writing back right now, just for that one legacy app that's running out there. So I don't know if that's answering your question. I apologize. I'm going to have to.
And then the password, the pass-through word.
Yep.
Did you just preserve the same hash that the original has, or did you?
Nope.
Since you had the source coming in, you just hashed it out?
Yep. So, and this is where I might have to be correct if I'm wrong. But what happens is when it comes through PingDirectory is going to do a quick look and say, hey, do I have it? Because that's the problem with Active Directory. Active Directory is very hard to get a password out of it unless you've turned on the allow reverse allow the reverse password recovery and stuff, which we don't have, and I don't think most companies want that in place because if you can do it, that means someone else could do that if they maliciously get in your environment. So what we've done is basically PingDirectory being in line with that call. So it's going to hit PingDirectory first. It's going to look and see if that username and password matches. If it doesn't, it's the one that's actually doing the bind against Active Directory, the authentication. So it's in line. So when it gets back, yep, that's good. PingDirectory already knows what that password is because it came into it first to the check. And it just goes, hey, thumbs up, it's right. It writes it into its own store and stores it that way. So that way I'm never messing with any of that stuff. Because I didn't want to deal with that. I really kind of want Active Directory just to go away without, and that's the thing. We didn't move a lot of the schema over because I didn't want to deal with that.
Yeah, question. In your view up there, you had workforce Active Directory kind of unified underneath the proxy.
Yep.
But otherwise, it's pretty much a customer directory migration with kind of workforce in its own silo.
It was customer, but the one thing we were trying to achieve is we really have a lot of applications, like I'm sure a lot of you guys do, to where we have administrative accounts that are logging into these things to manage them. So even though they're customer facing, so the customers are logging into the external facing side, but we have admins that are logging in and managing them. So like Portal, for example, right? You have Webster Portal admin councils. So what we wanted to do is give it a single directory, and then based on the bind account, so within their configuration, we can say, hey, an admin comes in, bind with this, we know it needs to go to that directory to authenticate them, because that's one of our credentials, that's an admin's credentials. If they're coming from the outside, they bind with a different one because it's actually a portal configuration doing it. We can say, hey, that's coming from our member portal. We know it needs to go look at the member side of it. We can route it. So it's nice because it's a lot easier to go to my developer and say, hey, you got this one directory to hit, and I'll give you different bind accounts for it. But even that, they don't even care. It's just as long as they get the right authentications back, that's what they're looking for. So, and I think I can probably do more at the end of this, but we'll go ahead and let Greg take on here, and then we can ask some more questions and answer.
Thanks, Dan. All right, thanks everyone for hanging out and staying for this directory migration masterclass. My name is Greg. I'm the lead developer for Ping Data Sync. First, I want to say a big thanks to Dan for partnering with Ping and helping us put this presentation together. Today we're going to really quickly walk through a demonstration of the strength and flexibility that Data Sync brings to directory migrations. We'll start with a fairly straightforward Active Directory domain. We'll introduce Ping Data Sync, PingDirectory, and when we're done, we should be well on our way to having a highly performant, scalable, and flexible identity management system. So just hypothetically, where we started, as many companies do, especially when they're smaller, AD early deployments are very straightforward. They're really just used to manage Windows systems users, Exchange accounts, things like that. But over time, more and more gets added. It's common that AD gets used to store customer lists, asset management, authentication for third-party and line of business applications. And all that additional load can lead to instability, to difficulty in management and support. So PingDirectory and its suite of related products can provide a highly available and highly performant IDM backend that will easily handle the task of managing your identities while also providing strong integration points so that you can leverage those identities to support your business needs. AD is great at what it does best, Windows user and computer management. So we're going to let it focus on that, and we're just going to try to lift a group of customer accounts that ended up in AD over time and shift those over to PingDirectory so that we can get the benefits of its reliability, scalability, and performance. So we'll do a quick walkthrough, pretty straightforward migration of identities from, like I said, that overloaded Active Directory instance to a clean instance of PingDirectory. So that's represented here by the little barrel. For this demonstration, we're going to use a 2012 Active Directory domain, and then due to the system constraints of running all this on my laptop, I'm only going to lift about 30,000 identities today. So once PingDirectory has been deployed and configured, we can deploy Ping Data Sync. Data Sync is a robust synchronization tool. It supports a breadth of use cases ranging from migration to coexistence. And it can be extended to integrate with custom data sources and destinations. Currently, we've got customers who've extended it to work with RESTful services, Kafka, and other messaging queues. A key thing to note as we're doing this AD migration, AD, like Dan said, doesn't expose passwords real easily. And so, as you mentioned, there are two ways to manage that. One, we do have the password agent installed in our local AD. So that's one way to go, but that is, as he said, totally optional. We do have the pass-through authentication plugin as our other option. So before I get into the demo, I'm going to quickly show you a little bit of the configuration for Data Sync. So those of you familiar with Ping products, this is the web admin console for Ping Data Sync. We're going to take a quick look at the sync pipe for AD to PingDirectory. And then just to define terms, Data Sync looks at things in terms of sources and destinations and one-way pipes between those. So a sync pipe is from Active Directory to PingDirectory or from a JDBC source to PingDirectory. In this case, we're looking at Active Directory to PingDirectory. There are a number of options here, but the thing that's really key to take away here is our sync classes. And a sync class allows us to define or to categorize a group of objects that we want to synchronize on. At a very high level, we can start at just like a base DN level. And in this case, like I said, we want to move our customers. So we have a customers OU in our domain that we want to shift. And then we can also do some high-level filtering. Again, in this case, Active Directory stores a lot of things, computers, printers, asset management devices. We just want users, so we're going to use a real simple LDAP filter and grab those users. In the sync class, the key thing to take away here is our attribute maps. These maps they're really the power behind sync. So this allows us at a per attribute level to define the way we want to synchronize information. So for example, I can do a direct mapping. I can take the common name out of the Active Directory record and map it to the common name in PingDirectory. Or as is the case in PingDirectory, our object class hierarchy doesn't match the one that's in Active Directory, so we can just construct the hierarchy we want. There's also pattern matching based things, so if you want to combine attributes on one target into another in the source, if you have embedded JSON attributes, we have ways to handle all of those. So this provides a great deal of power and flexibility when migrating data from one system to another. All right. Data sync provides two methods to synchronize between data stores. Resync, which is our one-shot big batch method, and then real-time sync, which, as the name suggests, keeps things synchronized in real time. We will use resync to initially seed PingDirectory with the customer data currently stored in AD. So coming over here, real quick before I start the synchronization, I do apologize, some of that text is going to be kind of tiny, but on your, I guess y'all's far left. This is a little application called Watch Entry that ships with PingDirectory. It's just a little tool that lets us look at an individual LDAP entry and watch it for changes. So this is user Tom, and he's just sitting here, and these red flashes, these indicate updates to the record. So I have a tool that's generating synthetic traffic in the background. Obviously, the description on a user probably isn't going to change once a second in your environment, but this is just here to visually demonstrate what's happening. So like I said, on the far left is Active Directory. In the middle is our instance, that same user in PingDirectory. It is totally empty because he is not there yet. So hopefully when we're done, he'll be over there. And then here on the right is the console I'm going to use for that. All right, so let's begin the resync run. All right, as this spins up, like I said, I'm only moving about 30,000 entries today because of the constrained nature of this laptop, but in other customers we have done, from AD to PingDirectory, we've moved let's see, what was it, 2 million, upwards of 2 million in an individual resync run, and then with some other directories, we've done as many as 70 million in an individual resync run. So we can certainly handle way more load than 30,000. All right, so you're seeing things start to populate. Here on the far right is just the status window telling us the number of users we've gone through so far. You can see that our user Tom has already been synchronized. And it looks like we're done. So 36 seconds, 30,000 users. I'd say that's pretty good. But just to show you a little bit here, so we looked at over 30,000 entries. About 247 were entries we didn't care about, and we did manage to create all 30,000 entries successfully in PingDirectory. And like I said, that was 36 seconds, so I'd say that's pretty good. A couple things to call out here. You'll notice that this user in PingDirectory is a lot thinner attribute-wise than the Active Directory record. Some of that is I chose to not define all of those attributes, so you have the freedom to pick as many or as few as you want. Some of it is also that the user schema in Active Directory contains a lot of operational attributes, things that I don't care about. I probably really don't need the USN changed number to be synced over all the time. So you can take as much or as little as you want. All right, now that we've done our initial bulk import, we can turn on real-time sync and begin synchronizing user modifications and passwords. Before I do that, one thing I did want to mention, you'll notice there is no user password attribute shown on the PingDirectory, and like I said, AD does not provide us access to that in a read manner. There would have to be a modification on their side if you're using the password sync agent, or as you'll see later, the pass-through authentication plugin. All right, so we've finished our bulk import, and we can turn on real-time sync and begin synchronizing those user modifications. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm back in the admin console. I'm looking at my sync pipe. We're going to go ahead and turn this on. A quick thing to note, right? I can do all this stuff through the web console, but we also provide CLI commands, so all of these things can be scripted. Again, this is a real simple one, but just about everything you can conceive of doing in PingDirectory or its related products, you can do through the command line as well as the web console. So let's go ahead and save that change. And immediately. So now we get our flashes on the left with our changes, and almost instantaneously they are being synchronized into PingDirectory. So now this user is receiving updates in real time. I did not have to turn off PingDirectory. I didn't have to turn off Active Directory. I didn't need to go in any kind of maintenance mode, read-only mode, nothing. Like we can just continue to do this in real time. So we've got one last step before we can begin redirecting traffic to PingDirectory for authentication. So in our current state, as I said, without users modifying their passwords, those passwords are not synchronized and you can't successfully bind against your PingDirectory instance. So we're going to use the pass-through authentication plugin that Dan mentioned. So real quickly, let's take a look at what that looks like. So moving over to the PingDirectory admin console, I'm going to come in here to the plugin section. We're going to look at this pass-through authentication plugin. So the plugin provides two major benefits. First, it proxies authentication attempts for users who are missing passwords. And second, in the event of a successful authentication, it can store that new password on the local user. So along with the password agent, this is the other method for password synchronization. A couple of things I'd like to call your attention to. It's not just one server. We can put in an entire list of servers we want to be able to proxy authentication to. And then the key things, as Dan mentioned here, that local bind. So we can enable whether or not it's going to try to bind against PingDirectory before proxying the authentication attempt. And so if it succeeds locally, it's just going to go ahead and let that bind succeed. But if it fails, it will proxy that authentication over to, in this case, Active Directory. If it succeeds there, great. We can also then turn on this update local password, which is, if you fail locally and you get proxied to Active Directory and succeed there, because we have that password that you handed us, we can go ahead and write that down onto the user object, and that's a way to achieve user password synchronization. One step too far. All right. So now that we have PingDirectory synchronized with AD and ensured that it is receiving updates in real time, we can begin migrating our applications over to using PingDirectory for user authentication and management. So I'm going to do a real simple demonstration here with a little web app that was built to use the SCIM-based identity API that PingDirectory ships with. Here. All right. Awesome. And so that login was successful. I moved over real quick because I wanted you to see that flash. But see, we see now in the bottom here that we do have the pre-encoded and hash form of that user password. So that password has been synchronized solely through the pass-through authentication plugin. An important side note, just from a security perspective, it's not a great idea to return even an encoded password in a user search, which is what Watch Entry is doing. We specifically enabled this instance of PingDirectory to return that sensitive attribute for the purpose of this demonstration. So usually you would not want that to come back in a search. All right. So there we have it. We've successfully migrated our users from Active Directory into PingDirectory. Just as a recap, like we started with overloaded Active Directory instance, whole bunch of customers we built up over time that really didn't need to be there. We set up PingDirectory and Ping Data Sync. We used Resync to initially get our users over into PingDirectory. And then we enabled real-time sync. Once we were getting all of our changes in real time, we installed the pass-through authentication plugin that let us close the gap on user password synchronization, and we can begin migrating application traffic over. Pretty straightforward. Just in closing, I do want to touch on some things. I know Dan talked about the value of proxy and the advanced use case. So what I demonstrated was very straightforward. And I know probably everyone in here has a more complicated Active Directory or directory setup than that. And so we certainly meet those needs. Proxy is one of those ways. I mean, you've hundreds, maybe thousands of applications you need to migrate. It's certainly easier to make a DNS change than to go individually touch each one of those applications and change where they're logging in. So proxy can act in that way and just accept that traffic that would have gone to AD. So where we can make your migration more granular. We can dynamically route traffic based on, as you said, user ID or search criteria. And we can even remap schemas on the fly, so we can change data on the fly as it's going back and forth to support. You've got a legacy application, you don't want to update it to use a new schema. We can use proxy to provide a different schema to new applications coming online, but continue to support those old applications. And with that, I would like to thank all of you for coming and attending this session. Again, thanks to my colleague from BlueCross. And if there's any questions for either one of us, now's the time.
So we're actually planning on doing some more migration shortly. And so we have a need to, we never disable user accounts. So we have historical, like thousands of disabled accounts that have never gone away and never are supposed to go away. And I think the plan is to keep them in the legacy, in the current AT, and not sync them.
Right?
To PingDirectory. So I guess there's like probably like a filter
Correct.
that says
Yeah.
However, so as the new accounts get generated in PingDirectory, they'll sync back to the current, the legacy AD, and then when the status changes to disabled, they'll be cleaned up in maybe Ping but stored in old AD. Like, is that something that's doable? Like, am I
Right. Yeah. So.
conceptually, am I picturing that?
Yeah. So like I said, DataSync thinks in one-way pipes from source to destination. So if you want bidirectional, that's not, you build two pipes, right? So one from Active Directory to right, and then one back. And in each one, you can define your sync classes differently. You can set up different filtering. If you don't want disabled users to come across in one direction, but you do want them as they get disabled in PingDirectory to come back the other way, you can certainly set up filters to allow that.
The path authentication tool, you said you can do like a list of servers. Does it try to hit them one by one based on which one's on top, or is it just like?
I think there's a couple settings in that. I had it round robin. So there are a couple different ways you can configure that.
The reason why I'm asking is because so like my previous question, like before, was we're geographically dispersed and we have an AD, the main controller at each site. So I'm just curious how that's gonna affect the application.
Mhm.
Also, how many proxies you might need, and how we have that position potential.
Yeah, certainly, if you get more questions on that, we can talk about that afterwards. I believe it does have to run on the domain controller. Yeah, it has to run next to the AD. Yes.
I joined late, so
Okay.
you talked about it already. I came at the end of it. So this is more from between AD and PingDirectory, but let's say if you were doing PingDirectory and ISAM, which is a project we're kicking off with me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you guarantee or how do we work with the unique IDs, like say in ISAM, whatever, this is all customer side facing. So PingDirectory is going to have our prospects and our ISAM has our current clients.
Mm-hmm.
How do we assure the login IDs and the, how do you, it's a SAMA is here and a SAMA is here. How do you ensure that there's no overlap?
So it's going to come down to the way you define your. Yeah, it's going to come down to the way you define your attribute maps, so that you got to build whatever your schema is going to be in PingDirectory. You need to account for if they have those kind of things. Any deeper technical than that, we have our chief architect here who can, if you want to ask questions about that.
Right, there's several different options. Like one, for instance, PingDirectory or PingProxy provides global attribute uniqueness, so we can actually search across multiple stores and ensure uniqueness if you're kind of funneling all the updates through there. But I don't understand exactly what you're trying to do. So if you come to me afterwards, we have lots of different options for doing that, because we do have several customers that are trying to ensure globally unique login, and those logins can come from multiple places as they're trying to consolidate their properties. So it's
I
something
don't know
we've
if
seen before.
Chris Price is your peer, but I've been working very closely with Chris Price.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's tired of calling every
Okay.
day.
I have more patience, I guess.
Yes, gentleman back.
We have user repositories in the Sybase database, multiple Sybase databases that we want to pull over to PingDirectory.
So which database was that?
Sybase.
Sybase. I don't think we have a out of the box
Right, so
for
we
that.
can support JDBC connections, and the main thing is you just have to write a little bit of Java code to convert from whatever your relational model is into an LDAP model of the database. But all the connection management and retry and failover and all that kind of stuff is native to data sync. It's just a little bit of code to convert to the LDAP model for the relational model. So we've done synchronization with Oracle, obviously Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, DB2. So I don't know if we've done Sybase, but
Well,
we've got a lot under our belt.
and I can speak to that. So during our POC, we actually have Sybase. So during our POC, that was one of the things that Ping actually helped us do to basically prove out that we could connect to our Sybase, because that also is one of our core identity directories or stores that we need to pull from. So in our POC, we have that working. That's actually the next stage we're now working on, is consuming that data. We are internally debating if it makes sense to make the JDBC connection or to use like an API to do that. That's what we're still working through right now. But in our POC, we were connecting to a JDBC for driver to Sybase. It was working for us.
Any other? Yeah.
What's the underlying data store in the PingDirectory?
So that's Berkeley DB, right? Yeah.
Berkeley DB?
Yep.
Yeah, so Berkeley DB Java Edition is the embedded database that PingDirectory uses internally.
And how do you do, there's some kind of clustering, presumably, for availability reasons, depending on nodes go down.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's tons of options from a replication point of view. So it's one of the strengths of PingDirectory, is the replication. We also have a lot of control when it comes to consistency. So traditionally, including Active Directory, there can be really high latency for replication. For us, the replication is typically really fast, but if you want to ensure that any change is replicated within that data center to all servers or even to another data center before the client receives a response, you can do that. So it gives you a lot closer to strong consistency from a client point of view than you traditionally get with other LDAP stores.
And there's also caching options, is that right?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of caching options. If we do a lot to keep the data compact, so you can do a lot with a small amount, small footprint. But in situations where you want the data that you use infrequently, there's a lot of caching options. If that's your question.
Cool. Anything else?
How do you deal with the redundancy in the directory sync process if you're doing like file reading? So, for example, if I'm reading a change log by existing directory, I would like two directory sync servers or redundancy. How do you do so you don't write twice?
Mm-hmm. So each sync server is keeping track of where it is, and if they're in a replicated set, they're going to communicate that state between each other.
Right, but so I have two directory sync servers,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they speak to each other?
If you set, so that's how you could set them up in a replication set, right, and they will keep their state synchronized.
Just to clarify a little bit, sync is from a sync point of view. The directory servers is master, but sync is more master failover. And so you have the primary sync server, as long as it's up and available, it's synchronizing, but it's periodically exchanging its state, kind of a bookmark through the change log with other sync servers. And then if that went down for whatever reason, maintenance, or there's a network partition, the other sync server will pick up where it left off. And even in situations where there are network partitions, and we've had this happen in even really big networks, where there's partitions for multiple hours, even if you have two sync servers active at a time, the way that it operates, there won't be problems once things get restored. You'll have kind of extra updates that get dropped because things are already in sync, but it's not going to cause a problem.
All right. I think we have maybe one more question.
This is regarding the pass-through authentication plugin. When you have the two directories and they may have very different schemas of transformation, maybe a different DM structure, does the pass-through authentication, well, how does it know how to find the entry and the others
So you,
to do the authentication?
you can define a DN map. So it doesn't have to be a one-to-one DN for that bind.
Yeah, so in our case, ours isn't. So we have a pretty hierarchically set LDAP with our current Active Directory, and we've now made it completely flat in PingDirectory. So we are able to see him come in and say, okay, we know in this other directory you're within this structure, and that's we're remapping on the fly as well, like he's mentioning. So it goes and finds it. So
You source it, use attributes not in the DN to find it then?
Yes, you can also specify a search filter to use, and you have a lot of controllers that search filter. So it'll first do a search as a privileged account, and then do a bind with the entity that it finds.
and that's how we're doing it.
All right, if there are other questions, we'll be up here. Feel free to come talk to us. Thank you again for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.